Have you ever wondered if ancient symbols hold secrets we've completely forgotten? Well, we're about to dive into a really fascinating and, yeah, pretty controversial theory from our source material that suggests exactly that. A forgotten language that could, just maybe, reframe how we see history. So let's just start with that huge question. What if a lost form of writing held the key to unlocking brand new interpretations of some of the world's oldest, most sacred texts? That's the wild idea at the heart of what we're looking at today.
All right, to get our heads around this theory, we have to go way, way back, like to the very beginning. The core idea here is that these ancient characters aren't just old, they're supposedly leftovers from a single original language spoken at the dawn of humanity.
Now, here's where it gets interesting. The argument being made is that certain ancient characters, and they look a bit like early Chinese writing, aren't just historically important. No, the claim is that they have a sacred origin, one that goes all the way back to what the source calls an Adamic language. So what in the world is this Adamic language? Well, the theory says it's the original language spoken by Adam and Eve. And it gets even deeper, because it's then directly linked to something called the Endong and Abadumu languages, which supposedly belong to a super mysterious group the source calls the ancient immortalizing people. And that, of course, brings us to the keepers of this original language. Who were these people? Well, the source material paints a pretty incredible picture of a group it calls the saints. And listen, according to this text, these were not your average folks. The saints could supposedly fly across the heavens, they were immune to getting sick and even death, and they lived for 2,000 years. Their big values in life: longevity, tons of wealth, and lots of sons. As you can tell, this is straight out of myth and legend. Okay, so if this crazy powerful language existed, spoken by these immortal people, what happened to it? Where did it go? Well, the source material presents a really dramatic and, again, very controversial theory for how all this knowledge got buried. And it all centers on a famous biblical event. The big turning point, according to the source, is the infamous golden calf incident. You know the story, but this theory reframes it completely. It suggests it wasn't just about smashing a statue. It was about violently shutting down an entire way of communicating. And the claim made here is just staggering. The source alleges that during this incident, Moses led a nighttime attack that killed more than half of the Israelites, specifically the tribes who were still using this ancient picture-based writing. The theory basically says this was a violent, bloody end for this entire written language. But why? What was the reason? The source gives a direct quote. A curse it attributes to Moses. The writing was condemned because it was, quote, filled with idolatry and images of flying objects, which, you gotta admit, sounds a lot like a reference to those flying saints we just talked about. So the key takeaway here is the pictures themselves were seen as the problem. Okay, so with that pretty intense backstory in mind, let's get to the fun part. Let's look at the actual characters this source claims to have decoded and see what it says are their original hidden meanings. First, the source draws this really fascinating and, yeah, highly controversial parallel. It contrasts the saints, or Shanzan, with another group called the Junzai, who are described as regular mortals who stay away from spiritual food. Then, the theory takes it a huge step further and maps this whole duality right onto what it frames as the biblical divide between the Gentiles and the Jews. All right, let's look at our first character. This one is interpreted as Will. And we're not just talking about having a strong will. No, this is said to symbolize nothing less than God's divine will, his purpose, his justice, and his wisdom. It's supposedly a direct channel for divine guidance. And to back this up, the source connects this single character to a whole bunch of biblical verses. You've got everything from Jeremiah's promise of a hopeful future to a line in the Lord's Prayer from Matthew, and even passages in Psalms and Proverbs about God's guidance and justice. Each one is used to kind of reinforce the specific meaning of will. Next up, we have a character interpreted as grace of freedom. According to the theory, this symbol is all about the spiritual kind of liberty you get from knowing the truth and from the grace of Christ. It's a pretty powerful idea packed into one symbol. And you guessed it, the text ties this meaning to specific scriptures. It points to verses like the one in Galatians about being set free by Christ. And of course, that famous line from John, the truth will set you free, all presented as direct evidence for this character's true meaning. So let's just quickly pull all that together. You've got the saints who are set up against the Jinzi, creating that biblical parallel.
Then you have the characters for will and grace of freedom, presented as these keys to understanding divine purpose and spiritual liberty. It's basically a little roadmap of the theory's biggest claims.
So, what's the point of all this? Why go through the trouble of decoding these ancient symbols? Well, the source argues that figuring out these so-called original meanings isn't just for fun. It could actually have huge implications for how we study scripture. And that right there is the core thesis. It's the idea that by applying these ancient character meanings back onto biblical texts, we might just unlock entirely new layers of understanding. It's like suggesting there's a hidden linguistic key that could totally recontextualize passages we thought we knew inside and out. And this brings us back to a quote that you see again and again in the source material, almost like a mantra. The idea that using these characters could lead to many unexpected interpretations is the really tantalizing possibility that drives this whole thing. It's a massive claim about the power of a lost language. In the end, whether you find this whole theory totally compelling or just pure speculation, it does leave us with a pretty powerful question to chew on. It makes you wonder, how much of our history, our beliefs, and our understanding of the past has been shaped not just by what was written down, but by the languages that were lost along the way?